Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I'll try and come in under half an hour. Can I start by saying I listened with great interest to Ken McIntosh's contribution, and I take in good heart the preparedness to make common ground on the essential core of this debate. I think that's very welcome indeed. He mentioned that some of the statistics upon which we rely are experimental statistics, and it may be of value to go and look at the Office of National Statistics, because of course that is where these statistics come from, and see what being experimental actually means. It is not about them being imperfect or unreliable. All new statistical series are initially designated as experimental until there is a long enough run of the series to see that they do truly reflect and are reliable. So Ken McIntosh is correct to say, let's not, bet the bank on what is an experimental set of statistics. But I think it's equally important to realise that the professional standards and methods by which what are currently designated experimental statistics are produced are exactly the same high standards, with an expectation on the part of the Office of National Statistics that we will end up adopting these. Not all experimental stats are published. They may be developed and internally used for a period of 12 months or 24 months before they escape into the light of day. But I think it's recognised that this is such a fundamentally important area of public discourse that these statistics should be published while still having this formal but not normally common usage of the word experimental. And I thought it might be useful to underpin some of the debate with that explanation from the Office of National Statistics. The whole issue of youth employment, of course, is today a very different context from the one which I and others of my age group experienced when we were youngsters. I studied at university and graduated with an extremely modest degree. In fact, my degree is spectacular for its modesty rather than for anything else, and yet had 3 good job offers. Furthermore, when I was a student, never, when I looked for a job in summer, Christmas or Easter, did I fail to get one. The economic environment was very different. Today, students from the university sector with a second degree may not even be getting a second look from employers. So we are in a very different position in the round. The North East of Scotland, Mark MacDonald's excellent contribution delineated some of the differences there are there. And our issues, perhaps in the North East, are actually a lack of trained and appropriate staff rather than a lack of jobs for people to go into. And indeed, in my constituency, we have one of the lowest proportions of school leavers who go into tertiary education of any constituency in Scotland. And the reason is a good reason, in that they can all go into employment without having to do further training. But nonetheless, I think it is very important that the modern apprenticeship approach supports these people, because that easy transition into work, by comparison with others that there may be in the North East of Scotland, is not something that necessarily equips people for a lifetime of employment. So I very much support Banff and Buchan College, Aberdeen College, who've focused their efforts on providing training that's appropriate to local needs, and that largely means engineering training. We've had excellent support from local employers like Macduff Shipyard and Score and Peterhead, who employ huge numbers of apprentices and indeed advertise for apprentices. And of course, like all apprenticeships, these are linked to employment. And I think it's particularly good that we see those who come out of modern apprenticeship, huge proportion of these, 6 months later, remain in employment. Training and employment are so closely linked that they are, of course, important. I will. John Mason.
I thank the member for giving way, and it's encouraging the picture he has of the North East. Does he think that perhaps schools in other parts of Scotland should be doing more to point young people towards engineering and such jobs?
I think John Mason makes a very valid point, and perhaps it's one too that we should further extend by saying, in particular, we should encourage not just young men, but young women to take engineering. And in the North East, it's quite interesting how many of the high-performing apprentices turn out to be young women who've got a mathematical skill they've acquired in school, which they then go on in college and in employment to apply. Because the North Sea oil industry will, for example, provide many decades of employment, a lifetime employment for those who choose, renewable energy very, very similarly. So the college sector in the North East, as in the rest of Scotland, is a very important one in supporting increased employment for our youngsters. It is, of course, more expensive to train someone with engineering skills than it is to train someone in certain other disciplines. We need, for example, if you're talking about lathes, to have 2 people in the room supervising that activity for health and safety reasons, quite properly, so your costs are higher. And historically, until this government engaged with the college sector in a different way, we had difficulties getting adequate funding for these courses that cost significantly more. I'm very pleased, too, that the Scottish Government, in the contracts that it lets, is almost invariably finding space to support youngsters and apprenticeships through that mechanism. And I was delighted when I was a minister to meet apprentices whose jobs were being created directly as a result of the Scottish Government placing contracts. So I think the Government, at its own hand, is doing the kind of things that it should be. It is creating the educational environment for people to acquire the skills that they're going to need. And, of course, let me just conclude by saying we've heard quite a lot, quite properly, from people in areas not as lucky as the North East, where the stress is much greater. But even in the North East, we have our own pockets of deprivation. In Aberdeen, and even in my constituency, one of the most well-performing constituencies in employment terms, our unemployment rate's 1/3 of the Scottish average. Even there, one of the 10 areas of maximum deprivation was within my constituency. I'm delighted to say that some of the initiatives that the Government has taken are starting to make a difference to that. In youth employment, as in so many things, the Government, with the powers that it has, is doing a terrific job. Would that we had the powers to do more. Presiding Officer.